Hello, this is a tutorial on creating visuals for your music inside Ableton Live. I'm going to be using a suite of Max for Live devices called ZwoBot. If you're new to ZwoBot, I'd recommend you go back and watch my earlier tutorials, and I'll put a link to those in the top right corner of the screen now. And if you'd like to buy ZwoBot, there's a link in the description. It's a suite of around 70 to 80 different Max for Live devices, each of which is a different visual effect or visual generator. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the Pulse device, which creates these animated lines and patterns which will respond to the incoming audio or the BPM of your project. So I've already connected it to my player. If I hit play, this is the pattern that it's generated on its default setting, but it's not moving at all because we've got this pulse BPM setting switched off and none of these dials are being modulated. So if you want it to move, either you need to turn on this inbuilt BPM sync dial, or you need to have these settings being modulated like this. And the way you can do that is by turning on these audio responsive controls, but I'm going to come back to that later. But now I'm going to do it using the built-in BPM sync. So this dial will basically animate this pattern based on the setting you select. So the higher up it is, the faster the movement is going to be. And this is synced to the BPM of your project. So this works independently of the master beat control on your ZwoBot player, and all of these beat controls here respond to this beat control, not the master one. So I'm going to turn the master one off. Okay, so I'm going to put this at 1/8 for the time being. This button here, you can turn that on to get linear animation. So by default there's easing on it, so you can see it's not a linear movement. Whereas if you turn this on, now it's linear. And it's not going back and forth, it's just moving straight to the left. Now you can also manually trigger this BPM sync. So let's say I want this modulation dial to change with the BPM. You can see now it's changing in accordance with whatever this setting is. But if you took this off and you want to have manual control over that, you can hit this button. So now every time I hit this button, anything that has a BPM control, so let's just put all of these on. I can put these on here. I can manually choose when they change by hitting this button. You can also have audio responsive controls on that, so if I go to low, now they're all changing in accordance to the lower frequencies of the incoming audio. Or I can choose high. I'm going to have that off for now. I'm going to turn all of these off for the time being, put everything back to its default setting, and I'm going to use this inbuilt BPM control, so I'm going to put it to 1/8. Here we've got amplitude, modulation and density. So amplitude controls the sensitivity, so the higher up it is, the faster the movement is going to be. So I'm going to leave that on the default for now. Modulation changes the thickness of the shapes. As you can see, as I'm bringing it up, there's more of the black lines. As I bring it down, there's more of the white lines. So that controls the thickness of the black and white lines. I'll leave that at the default for now as well. And then density controls how many of these lines there are. So you can have more lines as you bring it up, or less as you bring it down. And then over here, you can choose what the pattern is. So there's different modes here, A to F, and then there's these different shapes. So the way these behave will depend on which mode you're on. So on A mode, which is what I'm on at the moment, these second lines don't do anything. but these first rows you can see will change the direction of the lines. So at the moment they're vertical, but you can make them horizontal or diagonal in either direction. Now if I go to B, you'll notice now we've got this middle section, and now I can change where that split is using this second row. So because B creates a split in the screen, this row controls one half of split and this row controls where the split is. So if I want the split to be vertical down the middle, I can choose this top one. If I want it to be horizontal down the middle, I choose this one, and these will put a split diagonally across the screen. And then this one will choose where the lines are going. And then C does a similar thing, but it just works slightly differently. And same with the others. So D, we've got split, but again, it's working differently. And then E and F give you this kind of bend in the pattern. Up here we've got this fade button, so that just creates a blurred effect on everything. Here we've got this pulse mode full or invert. I'm not entirely sure what that's doing because it's not really inverting them, but it is changing the pattern in some way. I'm going to leave that on full. And then you've got this FXAA option, which will kind of blur the edges of the lines. As I mentioned earlier, all of these controls can be synced to either the internal BPM or, like I said, you can manually control it using this button. But they all also have audio responsive controls. So if I turn these beat controls off, we can have each of these settings change in accordance with the incoming audio. So I'm just going to unmute this track. This is a song by an artist called Cape Canaveral. The track is called Ghost Rips. It's released on Machine Records, and I'll put a link to that in the description if you want to listen to more of it. It's not available yet, but you can pre-order it. It'll be out soon. You can listen to this track though. Okay, so I'm going to put this amplitude setting to respond to the lower frequencies, and then the modulation or the density, let's put that on the highs, and I'll put the beat control on these two so we can see they're changing. It's a bit fast, so maybe I'll slow this down a bit, change it to one note instead. And if you wanted to add some colour to this, because maybe you don't want it to just be black and white, you can use the pattern device. I've done a separate tutorial on this, so I'll put a link to that in the top right corner now. But if I just switch this on, if you put it to this H pattern mode, and you make the size down to 0, you're just going to get a full screen of colour. And I've got the colour changing. And this, like the Pulse module, has an internal beat control, so this is changing in accordance with this, which is set to half note. And now I've got that pattern module on top of my Pulse module, so we're not seeing the Pulse module. So if we want to see it, we need to either set the pattern as a texture map, which will do this, or you can use a blend mode. So I can set it to multiply, or whichever of these blend modes you want, depending on how bright you want it to be. So if I set it to multiply, so now we're getting some color. But if you don't just want it to be a solid color, you can use some of the patterns you get with this device. So if I have this change, and then I'll have the size go back to the default, I'll turn some of these settings on. So now we're getting patterns underneath this Pulse device. So that's what you can do if you want some color in there. The way I quite like to use it is to have it apply as a texture map to an image or visual, and you can do that by pressing this T button down here. So that will now, instead of having white and black lines, it's going to split up the image you've got underneath it. Down here in the bottom left, we've got our usual transparency controls and our blend modes. So if I turn off this texture button, you can see this dial here controls the overall transparency of the effect. And then you can blend it with your visual using these different blend modes. So that is it for the Pulse device. If you found this video useful, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I've got loads of other ZwoBot tutorials, and I will be back with another one soon.